Hey, this is Lyanna, and this is my first solo review for the White Noise YouTube channel. I'm going to be talking about the highly anticipated Evil Dead Rise. It's a film that I have been so incredibly excited for, and so has Sky. Please bear with me because, like I said, this is my first solo review, and I'm very used to the chit-chatty nature of our usual podcast episodes and kind of reaction videos. So without further ado, this is Lyanna with a review of Evil Dead Rise. So I think it's safe to say that 2023 is the year of horror. Sky mentioned that in her Megan review. And I mean, the further we're getting into the year, the more she's proven right. It's insane, not just how many horror films we've been getting, but the quality of them, both independent and big budget studio productions. So Evil Dead Rise is the fifth installment of the Evil Dead, I guess, franchise, which also includes the Ash versus Evil Dead show, which is kind of its own entity, but we kind of have to mention here. So Evil Dead Rise is similar to the 2013 Evil Dead in that is its own entity, but unlike the 2013 film, it's not trying to necessarily remake anything. It's something completely new, which I think is really fantastic, and I will talk about a bit more further on. This one was directed by Lee Cronin, who's an Irish director who did the film The Hole in the Ground. I've not seen it myself, but it seems to be something that quite a lot of people enjoy. And, you know, I would say that Evil Dead is like starting to do this thing that's kind of like the Marvel factory, where they're probably going to bring in these like really promising directors and then be like, oh, make an Evil Dead film. I don't know how I feel about that because at the end of the day, it's starting to seem like these films could potentially just be trying to follow a format similar to Marvel. That's not necessarily a bad thing because, you know, people have expectations from a franchise, but I'm not necessarily saying it's a good thing either. If you get to the end of this review, I will be sharing some details which Evil Dead Rise has in common with the other films, some fun Easter eggs, and some other bits.
Groovy.
Another important thing to note is this one was executive produced by Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell. Sam Raimi directed the originals, and of course, Bruce Campbell is the incredible Ash. And I mean, would it really be something Evil Dead related if they weren't involved? The fact that they were involved really endeared me to this one and the 2013 one. As you probably know, Campbell has a cameo in this one. He doesn't pop up physically, but his voice appears in a certain capacity, which I'll say more about later in the Easter egg section. So to get things going, here's a little bit of a spoiler-free overview of the film. You can skip to the timestamp I've listed if you want to start hearing more about the actual story. So Evil Dead Rise is about a small family, and it is set in a high-rise apartment building, hence the title, Evil Dead Rise. If you're like me, a total dumbass, you didn't even make that link. It's kind of genius, kind of not. I like it, say what you will. It's fun to not have something just called Evil Dead. I mean, how many films could they call Evil Dead, really? This setting is kind of interesting. I do like it. I do have my gripes with it, which I'll get into. But basically, the film follows two sisters named Beth and Ellie. Ellie is the older sister, and she is a recently divorced mum who has three kids. She's raising them by herself. It's kind of insinuated that her husband left on really bad terms. And yeah, her kids are at an age where she's kind of struggling. The younger sister, Beth, is an emo girl, and she's a guitar tech who's just come back from tour after finding out she herself is pregnant. And she's trying to reconcile, before a Deadite invasion. And she, she's got a bit of guilt because she's been avoiding her sister's calls, who is divorced. I mean, yeah, we all avoid family phone calls and texts, but can you imagine avoiding phone calls and then finding out your sister is divorced? I'd feel pretty bad. But anyhow, she seems to have a good relationship with her nieces and nephews. The sisters are trying to reconcile a bit. They seem kind of close, kind of not, like maybe they were in the past, but I think that kind of works in the film's favor. You know, you're trying to repair this relationship between siblings. That can be quite difficult. And then, them turning into a undead monster. That's kind of unpleasant. But I think the fact that their family members makes this film a bit more interesting in a way, because I think, don't get me wrong, friends killing each other is all scary and all, but 2013 proved that by including family members, like, it's a bit more traumatizing. Beth recently finding out she's pregnant also kind of lends this theme of motherhood to the film. I don't think it really dives too far into that beyond the surface level. There is a mention that the sisters had a unpleasant relationship with their mum, which I think could have been something really interesting to lean into. Maybe that was included and removed, but it just seemed like an obvious thing that they could have included. Deadeye Ellie talking about their mother more, or like using their mother's voice. I think that could have been something really cool to see. But they did do little bits, like the Deadeye manipulates her kids and all these other parts. There's definitely, a theme of being a parent and family running throughout it, which I think I've made pretty obvious at this point. Those parts work really well, like the kitchen sink drama, but every now and again it kind of feels like they're going on about it a little bit too much. It's not a long film by any means. It's, I think, an hour 40, but sometimes it feels like maybe you could have cut here. It's almost like they didn't know where to lean into because they were unsure of tone, which is completely understandable because this one seemed to experiment a bit more, towing the line between the original films and the 2013. So I completely understand, the fear of, do we go campier? Do we go funnier? Do we go sillier? Do we go more gore? They definitely struck a decent tone. I wasn't too impressed by it, but it definitely was its own thing, which I really appreciated. I would say it's closer to the 2013 than the originals. I mean, that film came out more recently, and the originals were made by two guys who made films called things like Corny Casanovas and Booby Bartenders when they were in high school. These dudes were never going to make super gory horror, but interestingly, the 2013 film, which was also produced by Raimi, is apparently a lot closer to Raimi's original vision for the film, which would have been a lot scarier, a lot gorier, and this film's a bit closer to that as well. So I'd be really interested to hear Raimi and Campbell's thoughts on the film. I don't know if they've spoken about it much publicly yet, but I really want to see if this is maybe the kind of thing they wanted to make, because it's got a few more one-liners and stuff than the 2013, but it's still not quite as gory. So maybe this is the tone that they would have liked to create if they were making an Evil Dead film now. Bruce Campbell is getting on in age. My king cannot keep getting brutalized in these films for much longer. He's like nearly 70. The actual dialogue in this is nowhere near as interesting, I don't think, as the 2013 or the originals, because the originals are funny and that's what the dialogue leans into, and the 2013 one really dives into addiction and has this brilliant link and parallel between addiction and like the curse of being a deadite. I really liked that. This one, its motherhood theme, which I mentioned, tries that, but I'm not too sure how successful it is at it. And sometimes the dialogue fell a bit flat. I don't think that was helped by some of the bad accents. This was, I believe, a New Zealand production, or at least it has a lot of like Australian, New Zealander people in the cast, and sometimes those accents slip through, which is a bit jarring. For the most part, it was okay, but it didn't help with the setting. But as for performances, I mean, I would say most of the kids did a pretty good job, but the absolute standout was Alyssa Sutherland as Ellie. She was incredible, both in the beginning as a mother and a sister and as a deadite. Like, you could just tell this woman was having so much fun doing a horror film, and I just props to her, because I don't think she's done anything like this before. I mean, I know her from Vikings, where she slays, but she's not like fucking threatening to like kill her children. So it was completely new, and I just loved that. Like, I love seeing an actor so invested and absorbed by a role. She just completely disappeared into it. And that's, of course, helped by the incredible effects. I honestly could not tell you where the line between the practical and CG was. I mean, there were some obvious parts which are CG, but for the most part, it just looked gorgeous. The cinematography was kind of a bit obvious, kind of like yellow and teal, like orange and teal lighting scheme, which is very common. Some of the camera work was really interesting. That fisheye lens that was used a lot in marketing was a really lovely idea. That was great. Some of the shots were fantastic. The Deadites were very dynamic. I can't really think of any other word for it. I mean, Ellie in the bathtub, rising up. It was just like a lot of movement to her performance, which was a fantastic decision. She was like a Deadite gymnast. It was great. And I'm gonna start going into spoilers here, kids. So if you've not seen the film, then maybe turn this off, pause, go watch the film, or proceed at your own peril. So one of the things that most people have been talking about when it comes to the horror aspects of this film is I believe it's called the Marauder, which is the monster that is created by the bodies of Deadite, Ellie, Bridget, and Danny. One thing I will say is I think it's fucking fantastic that the two teenagers were not off limit. I mean, props to the creators for being ballsy enough to do that. I mean, it shouldn't be this big deal, but at the end of the day, like, you know, killing off young people in films is kind of like, that's kind of crazy. Especially now when things have kind of become quite tame when it comes to these like high budget horror. So yeah, this was a bit of a ballsy move that I think really paid off. That massively works in the film's favor. And the fact that they don't just turn human, you know, like that fucking monster gets like eaten up by the compactor and all, and shoved in there, might I say, by a family member. Like, this was all brutal and it really worked in the film's favor, and that's why I think it picked up so much later on. That's when it went more Evil Dead to me. It picked up, it went a bit crazy, kind of like the 2013 one. It starts slow and then it goes nutty, which I know you have to set the groundwork, you have to lay the groundwork in order to get this big payoff. So you care about these characters, but it maybe went on a little bit too long for some people's taste. Another thing like that for me was, like I said earlier, the setting. I really enjoy the fact that it wasn't in a cabin for once, because, while that's fun and traditional, that can get very stale very quickly. And I think that it adds a lot to what the Evil Dead is, in that, they're building a lore clearly. They talk about the 3 books, both in the Army of Darkness film, and I think there might have been a mention in the show. There definitely is a different book in the 2013 Evil Dead. So, they're building this kind of like MCU for the Evil Dead, if you will. So I like that it's expanding the world. But the problem is that while this was an effective choice, like a high-rise apartment, that's really cool. We've seen that in loads of stuff now, like The Raid, used really effectively to build like a claustrophobic tone. I think it works well in other films, to have a claustrophobic setting when you establish a wider world beforehand, so the claustrophobia can really set in. But you don't really see too much of that in the beginning. You see a cabin, which is a bookend at the beginning and the end of the film, which I actually wasn't very keen on. And you see Beth in like a bathroom. The implication is that, she's on tour and stuff like that. But these didn't really work for me. You don't see people about their life and then getting trapped. Like, it just doesn't work. Like, the darkness of the high rise is just present within the beginning a bit as well. So it doesn't seem like this sharp contrast. There's an earthquake which traps them in, and that kind of was played a bit too much up. It was a little bit corny to me. I didn't like the way they found the book, which was a hole in the ground. Some people liked that. Some people said it was a reference to Lee Cronin's previous film. Not so sure. But I don't know. I just felt that a high rise was a really good idea, but not necessarily well executed. I think it could have been interesting to have them get outside of the flat, because that felt very repetitive, like going from one room to the other, one room to the other. And it also seemed daft to me that Beth would like leave kids in the other room when Ellie was literally just outside the door. But that's just me. I don't know. I can't say much. I don't have kids. I think I would have liked it a lot if, like, you saw people in staircases or them going into other apartments, kind of like Attack the Block. All in all, I do think this was a pretty good film. I think if it was its own original film that wasn't related to Evil Dead, I might like it a bit more, and I'm sure a lot of people would agree. But of course, then maybe some people would just call it a Evil Dead ripoff. Who knows? For, the latest installment, I'm quite happy. It isn't a masterpiece, but I don't think anyone was, expecting it to be. I'm quite happy with what it is, and sometimes it's fun to watch a film that isn't, a 5-star cinematic masterpiece. It's fun to watch something that's just pure entertainment. And that's what I really enjoyed about it. This is proper Halloween cinema material. It achieves what it sets out to do, no more, no less. Bloody fantastic. I hope Lee Cronin goes on to do some great original stuff, because I think he really has it in him. And I would love to see Alyssa Sutherland in some more horror. I'd really like to see Evil Dead go in this direction. I'm not sure I want it to be this huge franchise, but Campbell has stated that there is intention for that. So, we can't fight these demons. We can't fight these dead eyes. We got to live with it. I think that this turning into a franchise could potentially be great for small-time filmmakers. I did mention how it could kind of become an MCU earlier, but honestly, it is a franchise that was born out of love for small budget filmmaking. And if it gives a lot of these smaller filmmakers a chance and they aren't eaten up by the studio, then I think it's great. So before I give a star rating or some absolute final thoughts, I'm going to reward you with those promised Easter eggs and details which you might have missed or you might have seen, and we can revel in them together. This feels like a Watch Mojo ripoff, but I promise it's not. So I mentioned the elevator scenes being references, and I felt like the one where Ellie was possessed kind of resembled the tree branches in the originals and in the 2013 remake. I thought that was a really nice touch without doing the exact same thing. And I felt that the second one was very clearly a Shining reference, which, you know, they couldn't avoid. It's like a possessed parent in an isolated building, blood in an elevator. They kind of had to do that referential shot. I know a lot of people sometimes find that cringy and like, oh, that's so lame and derivative, but I find it fun. The film also used some classic lines from the other films, such as Swallow Your Soul, Dead by Dawn, and Come Get Some. There have been some iconic weapons used by both the Deadites and the protagonists in previous films, and I feel like this one's version of that is the tattoo needle, which was kind of like Ellie's version of that butcher's knife in the 2013 remake, which I mean, like, scarred all of us, and the chainsaw, of course, from the earlier films. And finally, Bruce Campbell voices one of the priests, saying warnings to the other priests on one of the vinyl recordings in this film, which is really cool. And it's nice to have like such a subtle cameo. To me, they're always more fun than, you know, your kind of like visual Stan Lee ones. I'm not saying either is better. I just kind of like those really, really subtle ones so you don't get taken out of the world too much. So I really hope you enjoyed them, and I hope you've enjoyed this review. I would probably give this film something like a 3 out of 5. I'd like to say 3.5, but I just don't think it was quite there for me. I think that if the franchise leans in this direction, I'm going to look forward to them. They may not be amazing, but it's just fun, you know? I really enjoyed this, and it was just great to have some like silly fun again, and not to be as traumatized as I was after the 2013 one. Thank you guys for listening, and I really enjoyed doing this first solo review. Please look forward to the next ones. This is a series that me and Sky are going to be doing on the YouTube channel, and we're just loving it, to be honest. So let us know if there's any films you'd like us to do in the comments. Please subscribe and like and comment if you feel like it, because it really does help us out, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.